A warning aimed at the U.S. by a Russian official may deepen an already frosty relationship between the two countries. The Russian official called for American cooperation on its military efforts in Syria to avoid, quote, unintended incidents. This comes amid concerns that Moscow is using its military to support Syria's embattled president. Kristen Fisher joins us live with more on this story. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Elizabeth. So right now, the U.S. military is using Syrian airspace to fight ISIS. At the same time, Russia is also sending troops and equipment to Syria, including likely some anti-aircraft missiles. So even though Moscow claims that we share a common enemy in ISIS, the chance of the U.S. and Russian military encountering each other on the battlefield is growing more and more likely by the day. Yesterday, Russia's foreign minister urged Washington to cooperate more militarily in order to avoid any, quote, unintended incidents. Problem is, Russia supports Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad, and the U.S. does not. U.S. officials believe Moscow is now building up forces in Syria at a rapid rate in order to protect Assad, a claim Moscow denies. They say they are simply sending equipment to help Assad fight ISIS.
If a priority is the fight against terrorism, then selfish considerations like changing of power in Syria should be put aside. All the more so when previous attempts to change in Iraq, in Libya, have led to the growth of the terrorist threat.
Well, yesterday, President Obama pushed back while meeting with troops at Fort Meade in Maryland. In his most clear terms yet, he warned Russia to stop sending more support to Assad.
We are going to be engaging Russia to let them know that you can't continue to double down on a strategy that's doomed to failure. This is going to be a long discussion that we'll be having with the Russians, but it is not going to prevent us from continuing to go after ISIL very hard.
Now, later this month, both Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin will be at the UN General Assembly in New York, but at least for now, the two leaders have no plans to meet in person.
But if they did, wouldn't you want to be a fly on the wall for that?
Kristen, wouldn't we all, right?
Wouldn't we all? Kristen Fisher following that story.
To new reaction from the White House now on Moscow's military buildup in Syria. Russia, an ally of President Bashar al-Assad, has increased its presence in that war-torn country just as Assad's regime loses ground to rebel forces. Peter Ducey live at the White House now. Peter, why is the White House talking to Russia at this time?
Because, John, they really want some clarity from the Kremlin about what exactly they are doing, sending that steady stream of equipment and military personnel into Syria. Just a few minutes ago at the White House briefing, we didn't get a whole lot of detail from Josh Earnest, at least not yet, about what these discussions are going to entail between the Americans and the Russians. But here is what we know. The U.S. and Russian talks are going to be military to military, time and place TBD. Something that's more settled, though, the Israelis really don't like the looks of things in Syria right now. President Benjamin Netanyahu is worried that Russian weapons there could be scooped up by people wishing to attack Israel. So it was announced today Netanyahu is going to head to Moscow next week to get the story from Putin in person. John.
So what do the diplomats do next when it comes to Russia?
Well, the Secretary of State John Kerry is heading from Foggy Bottom across the river over to the Pentagon today, and this is at the top of his list of things to talk about with the military planners, especially since yesterday we heard General Lloyd Austin make an announcement about our efforts in Syria so far, saying that we've only trained 5 soldiers who are still able to fight. And even though the White House said today they still have confidence in Austin and in that program, that comment not playing very well on the Hill.
I must say I've been a member of this committee for nearly 30 years, and I have never heard testimony like this. Never.
And we heard today John Kerry has been on the phone with his Russian counterpart 3 times in the last week. But just a few minutes ago, Josh Earnest said that President Obama has not talked to Russian President Putin anytime recently. John.
Peter Ducey at the White House. Peter, thank you.
This breaking news out of Iran, the supreme leader has released propaganda, ISIS-like video, really, threatening the United States. This comes not even a week after the White House won approval from Senate Democrats for the nuclear deal. A lot of people still scratching their heads about how they were able to do that in the first place. But take a look at this just released from Iran video and the translation on it as well.
آمریکای متجاوز و جنایتکار است.
So I'm joined by KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. KT, welcome. Good to have you here. I watched the whole thing last night, and basically it goes through what they see as the defeats of the U.S. military in the past. They go through Lebanon, they go through Iraq, and they basically say, look, we're not looking for war, but don't even try it. And then they show pictures of Iranian missiles bombing U.S. naval missiles and people coming home in boxes, U.S. soldiers and Marines coming home in boxes in this video. Is this what you would expect from somebody who we've just been at the negotiating table
Well,
with?
it's what I expected, and I think a lot of people expected. You know, the President and Secretary Kerry were counting on two things. One, that Iran wouldn't cheat, and that Iran would change its evil ways by the time it got nukes. Okay, neither of those are turning out to be true, and we've just seen in the last week, not only this video, they're not changing their evil ways, they're doubling down on their evil ways. They've doubled down on their support for terrorist groups. They're doubling down on chants of death to America and tweets about annihilating Israel. And as far as cheating, well, you know what else they found out last week, Martha? Oh, miraculous! We discovered new stockpiles of uranium on our own Iranian territory. Well, wait, that means that they knew about that all along. So they have cheated. They've got uranium mines that they didn't tell us about. So both of those things, they won't cheat and they will change, those are now wrong. And they've now given us evidence. The one thing I've learned in my 40-some years of experience in this field, when a dictator tells you something, believe him. Because he's not playing to the crowds.
But that's not what we've heard from the administration or from John Kerry. They have basically said, you know, this guy who you see on your screen right now, he likes to say all this crazy stuff, but don't worry about him because we're sitting at the table with the people who matter in Iran. They're increasingly moderate. They want very much for their country to emerge as an economic power. He's just sort of the, you know, the nutty relative that you really don't need to worry about.
Well, that's what they say, but the joke is on them because the nutty relative is the guy in charge. And the nutty relative is the one who's driving the entire Iranian nuclear program, the entire Iranian terrorist program, the entire Iranian expansionist program. The guys that Secretary Kerry sat down, they might be nice guys. They went to American universities for graduate school, but guess what?
And they might want those things that they're talking about,
but they
right?
can be fired on a dime because the guy who really counts is the one that you've just shown, the one who really does still believe America is the great Satan. America is enemy number one.